Navy's Fifth Fleet is based. The Prime Minister here, Anthony Albanese, released a statement. He says, in part, a regime that relies on the repression and murder of its own people to retain power is without legitimacy. It has long been recognised that Iran's nuclear programme is a threat to global peace and security. He goes on, the international community has been clear that the Iranian regime can never be allowed to develop a nuclear weapon. We support the United States acting to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon and to prevent Iran continuing to threaten international peace and security. The Trump administration has been increasing pressure on Iranian leaders to secure a peace deal and also a deal that would reduce the country's nuclear capabilities. Talks between the US and Iran took place just days ago, and they were set to resume again next week. Iran insists its nuclear program is peaceful. In Tel Aviv, Israelis have expressed support for Israel's attack on Iran.
I feel good, I feel safe, everything is going to be okay. It's about time. I don't want to wait anymore for what's coming. Now it's coming, let's finish it and let's start the day. We've got Purim in 3 days, celebration of freedom. And it's kind of the history repeats itself because it was with Iran in Diamond Persian and it's coming back. Thank you. Have a beautiful day. I'm going to do my sport. Bye.
I think it's something we had to do. We see our enemies trying to get us back into war and to attack and threaten us, and they didn't have enough, and we need to protect ourselves. And I think with the Arab enemies, we noticed, I'm 43, I've knew some wars in my life, that we have to be the first. We have to establish that we are strong, we are not scared, and we are here to protect our land.
I was expecting the United States to attack first. I'm not sure that it's good for Israel to be the first one, but once it's taken and once it's done, I think and the hope for a great change in the Mediterranean.
Let's bring in Maryam Alamzadeh, who is an associate professor in the history and politics of Iran at Oxford University. Maryam, thanks for joining us this evening. Gosh, what a vast subject that is that you cover there. I mean, the history of Iran has been potted with conflicts like this. Does this one come as any great surprise right now at this moment in time?
Hi, thank you for having me. I don't think it's important whether or not it's a matter of surprise. I think it's more important how much a matter of pain and suffering it is, and it will be. For the people of Iran, for the people of the region, to my count, I think at least 8 countries are affected already. Yes, the Iranian regime is at fault. They have been combative through their 47-year history, but mostly through words, and less so through actual military threat. Iran actually has been the recipient of military attacks, as you know very well, recently pretty heavy ones. And this time around, it promises to be bigger, more devastating, and it comes at a moment where Iran is mourning the loss of thousands of lives by the hands of the government, and is kind of collecting the anger and the sadness caused by that to mobilize for democracy, for grassroots change. But war is very, very likely to kill that motivation and kill that sort of collective mindset that has formed.
That's interesting you should say that, because you certainly get the impression from the statements coming out of America that they would like there to be a civil uprising. And we've talked over the past few weeks many times about the different makeup of Iran now, very young population, seeing more of what is happening in the outside world. But you actually think that this will dampen it, do you?
Wars always have. This is not my opinion. This is what history has shown us. It usually creates a rally around the flag effect. Even if not that, it creates an existential threat and anxiety that pushes any agenda of resistance further and further down. yeah, a population under bombs is less likely to mobilize, has less opportunities to meet, to decide, to ponder what is possible. That's quite obvious if you look at similar historical examples.
What does the regime, its leaders, the Revolutionary Guard, what do they do in historical context, as I know you've studied it, when they feel their backs are against the wall and that their complete existence is being threatened?
Before the moment of the attack, they are doing everything they can to half-heartedly negotiate, and the other half of the heart is trying to just like buy time. When the attack happens, as you mentioned, they do have the pattern of increasing domestic repression, calling it an existential threat as it is, which would then justify any and every measure to resist against it. And that usually will end up costing ordinary civilians a lot, not just their lives. I mean, people will be killed under bombs, innocent people, but it's also the crushing it, the collapsing economy, the again, as I said, the repressive measures that will be introduced. There are already reports of the Basij militia strengthening its presence on just like ordinary streets, patrolling, putting up checkpoints to control the movements of like ordinary civilians in the fear of sort of either an uprising or maybe like collaborating with the other warring parties.
We know from various sources that the Ayatollah Khamenei and the president in Iran were targeted in the first wave of strikes. What do you think would happen should Israel and America decapitate the regime, if you like? Does it die with them?
That's a great question. If they are successful in doing that, and we still have to wait and see if that happens, because there are reports that Pezeshkian at least has survived the attack. There's still no news of Khamenei, as far as I know. But if they are able to do that, I think it's very hard to tell unless there are sort of behind closed-door negotiations with lower echelons of the regime in place, the IRGC, the political, stratum. Unless that has happened and they have sort of made some kind of a political deal who will take up power, it will lead to a power vacuum that very stratum can come in and fill, but it's not going to be smooth. It's going to be a lot of complex like power play happening, if not violence, because the IRGC and Basij are so penetrated through this capillary network that they have throughout the society and throughout the country's political establishment, that decapitation doesn't mean much. And they are also not a unified and homogeneous system. There's a lot of dissent happening within the system, within the IRGC and Basij itself. Dissent not in the sense of we want democracy, but in the sense of the repression, the anti-Americanism is not good for business. These are, a lot of them are businessmen who are benefiting from a rentier situation. So less isolation would mean more business opportunities for them. So this kind of divide has also happened, which will exacerbate the power play if the decapitation happens.
Mariam, can you explain for us the various different relationships between the regime in Iran and some of its closest neighbours? I'm thinking in terms of how those countries, which Iran seems to have sent missiles to, will respond. What are their neighbourly relations like?
Again, it has been very much affected with the on-again, off-again military activity against Iran. And in other parts of the region, to be honest. Right before the October 7 attacks happened by Hamas and the genocidal war that Israel started on Gaza, Iran was in the middle of negotiations and normalizations of relations with Saudi Arabia. Just before the June 12-day war in last June with Israel and eventually the US, Iran was in the middle of negotiations hosted by Oman, as they were this time around. So they have been trying to keep minimal sort of lifelines open with neighboring countries, because 100% isolation is just like devastating for the country, and the people in power know that. So they are trying to just like keep lifelines open while they stick to their sort of raison d'etre ideology of anti-imperialism, anti-Americanism, anti-Israeli stance, and so on and so forth. With military invasion by Israel and America, that kind of goes up in the air. There's basically no way that could be justified within the Iranian ideological sort of facade. So yeah, it's interesting to see what Oman will be able to further offer to just like de-escalate, to continue. But as of now, it doesn't seem like neighbors will be able to do anything, and Iran will be sort of willing to rely on their help.
Associate Professor Maryam Alemzadeh from Oxford University, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
More loud bangs are being heard in Abu Dhabi, according to the Reuters news agency. We know one did strike a target earlier on this afternoon or earlier this evening in the United Arab Emirates. Reuters saying that there is a new wave of Iranian missiles being launched towards Israel. That is according to the Israeli military. Let's bring in our Middle East correspondent Matthew Doran, who joins us from Jerusalem. Matt, this might be a short one if there are more missiles headed in your direction and the air raid sirens go off, but perhaps might be a good time for you to go back over the last few hours and tell us how we got to where we are now.
Yeah, just before we do that, just to give a sense of why we are actually getting these alerts but not actually hearing any sirens here in Jerusalem. What happens is that these advance warnings do come through. They're pushed to everyone's phone saying you've got a couple of minutes to seek shelter before the sirens may start to ring out. And then as those missiles are getting closer to their target, the air defence systems are doing a multitude of calculations to try to figure out what that target is. And that's why at the moment we are seeing sirens going off in Tel Aviv, the major population base here in Israel, some 55 to 60 kilometres northwest of where we are here in Jerusalem. We're also seeing them going off in the south, in the top of the Negev desert area, so around places such as Beersheba. Just looking at the map there, that's one of the areas where it is going off. And just while we were waiting to come on air, we actually heard some quite loud explosions to the south of where we are here. So clearly interceptions are being carried out, but it is sort of in areas around Jerusalem at the moment, not here where we would be hearing the sirens. So that's just to explain to our audience why we're talking about more missiles coming in, and you're seeing my mug on the screen coming from the roof of the ABC Bureau. Now, yes, let's jump back a couple of hours to how we actually got to this point. We learned just after 8:15 local time here in Jerusalem that Israel had started attacking targets in Iran, and it wasn't just in the capital Tehran, it was other cities as well, including Isfahan and Kermanshah there as well. Soon after, we received confirmation that this was not an Israeli operation alone, that the United States had also started to join in, and that it was launching missiles from the air and from the sea, pointing to that massive military build-up we've seen in the Middle East over the last couple of weeks or so, including Air Force carrier groups that are stationed in the Mediterranean. That is the USS Gerald Ford, which arrived off the the coast of the Israeli port city of Haifa yesterday, up near the Lebanon border, and also in the Arabian Sea, the USS Abraham Lincoln, which has been in that location for more than a week now. This is clearly something that has been brought in to not only bolster the US firepower to undertake these sort of attacks, but to also deal with any retaliation from Iran. And we have been seeing those return missiles coming into places like Israel over the course of the last few hours. But as you pointed out, also explosions being reported across the Gulf states. So in Bahrain, in the UAE, around Abu Dhabi, around Qatar as well, Qatari air defences being forced to spring into action here. They are much closer to Iran than we are here in Israel in terms of proximity, and that is why they are being attacked, partly because they're also home to US military bases. There's the Al Udeid base just outside the Qatari capital, Doha. There is another base in Bahrain as well. We have heard of also attacks in northern Iraq. Erbil is also home to another US military base there. So this is quite different to what we saw in June last year when Israel and Iran were engaged in their 12-day war. Again, a war that Israel started by launching a series of strikes. That was much more between two countries until the moment that the US decided to intervene and drop those bunker-busting bombs on the Iranian underground nuclear facilities. This time around, it is much more broad in terms of the Iranian retaliation because the Americans have been involved from the get-go here, and that is why we are seeing this situation deteriorating somewhat. We have heard from Israeli military officials in the last short while about how they are viewing this situation. They have said that these attacks on Iran were designed to take out things such as Iranian missile defences, so effectively clearing a path for future attacks, but that they were also targeting key Iranian personnel. I think we can read into that the Israelis and the Americans have been trying to take out senior members of the Islamic regime in these strikes, be it the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, be it the President Masoud Pezeshkian there as well. I think it's safe to say that they would have been targets as well as senior military commanders within Iran. In terms of whether or not they have been killed in these attacks, we do not have that confirmation. We wouldn't necessarily expect to have that confirmation so quickly, but it is still fairly early in the day here. It's only almost 1:30 in the afternoon. This is going to continue on for a number of hours, and that sort of information will continue to trickle out of Iran and also from the US and Israeli establishments as well as they get a firmer picture of what's happened on the ground there.
Matt, stay with me. I just want to bring our viewers up to date with a couple of breaking news lines that have just come into us here on the ABC News channel. We've just got word that the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese will hold a meeting with the National Security Committee of Cabinet tomorrow morning following the US-Israel attacks. The committee operates within the Prime Minister's department to advise on foreign policy and defence strategy. That meeting will kick off tomorrow morning, so the National Security Committee of Cabinet will meet tomorrow morning to discuss the situation here. Matt, I'll get your thoughts on these other breaking lines that I've got to bring our viewers. Russia's foreign ministry condemns US-Israel strikes on Iran as, and I'm quoting here, pre-planned and unprovoked acts of armed aggression. I guess that would be expected from Russia. A couple of others. New wave of booms heard in Doha, that according to witnesses being quoted on Reuters. And on the economic impact of this, Emirates, as you know, a massive airline, due to multiple regional airspace closures, Emirates have temporarily suspended all of its operations to and from Dubai. So that's a massive impact that will be felt around the world. Where should we start, Matt? International reaction then, the latest one from Russia.
Yeah, not surprising to hear that sort of rhetoric coming out of Moscow, considering the ties that do exist between Russia and Iran, and also Moscow's relationship with countries such as the United States there. So it's not surprising to hear Moscow describe it in those sort of words. However, I guess something to pick up there is that they have described this as pre-planned and unprovoked. Now, yes, this is pre-planned. Obviously, you don't just wake up in the morning and decide that you're going to launch significant strikes like this. This has clearly been in the works for a number of weeks, and Israeli military officials have confirmed that in the last hour or so, saying that there has been this planning happening between Israel and the United States for a number of weeks now. In terms of unprovoked, this is going to be an issue which I think will be debated at length in coming days and weeks, because the way that Israel is describing this, it described its attacks as preemptive strikes against Iran. People would argue that Iran wasn't necessarily about to launch attacks against Israel, although Israel always perceives that there is this existential threat coming from the Islamic regime in Tehran. And considering that these negotiations had been underway between the US and Iran, trying to come up with some sort of a deal on Iran's nuclear ambitions, the Omani foreign minister, who was acting as the mediator there, was saying as recently as last night, local time here, that he believed a deal was within reach. This idea of whether or not it was provoked or not, that will be subject to a lot of debate there. So not surprising rhetoric coming out of Russia, but certainly food for thought, I guess, as we continue to deal with this unfolding crisis.
I mentioned about Emirates suspending all flights in and out of one of its major hubs in the Middle East. Although this won't be known for a great length of time, the economic impact being felt around the world, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely. Airspace being shut down, but also where airspace remains open, the safety concerns there about flying any aircraft through those regions when there is this issue of missiles being fired in both directions is why you're seeing big players like Emirates suspend all of their operations through Dubai. Now, that is going to impact routes coming through Europe and also through the Asia Pacific region. Think how many Australians jump on an Emirates flight as they're trying to go through to the Middle East and beyond through to Europe. That is going to be crippling in terms of global air travel. Talking about Emirates, we've also seen other airlines saying that they are suspending their operations. If we're dealing with booms being heard over the skies of Qatar, over the skies of the Doha capital there, you would have to say that also Qatar Airways would have been looking at this very, very closely. This is going to cripple global transport for the foreseeable future while this is happening. And this is again very different to what was happening back in June last year during the 12-day Israel-Iran war. That was missile fire that led to the closure of Israeli airspace for the duration, Iranian airspace, but also intermittently Jordan, the country that sits in between those two countries. It had tried to, or been forced to close its airspace and reopen it and close it depending on the situation. This is far broader because that Iranian response is targeting those Gulf states, Bahrain, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and that is why we're seeing big players like Emirates saying that it is simply not safe to fly at the moment while this situation is unfolding.
Latest we have, Matt, is that air raid sirens are being heard in Doha. As we heard from the Israeli military, they pre-warned us that another wave of attacks was coming from Iran. So air raid sirens in Doha and potential missiles going into Abu Dhabi. Again, no indication of whether they have struck anything or whether they have been shot down. I'll get your thoughts on this, Matt, as well, actually. The Reuters news agency reporting that an Iran-aligned Iraqi group, Kataib Hezbollah, I know Hezbollah, I don't know the Kataib link there, says it will soon attack US bases. Now, this would indicate that Iran's proxies are ready to move.
Well, this is certainly what many people had been fearing, that groups such as that one in Iraq, the Houthi rebels in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon could be drawn into this. Now, over the last couple of days, there has been an intense bombardment by Israel of southern Lebanon, effectively trying to, I guess, warn Hezbollah not to join in on this, and that if they did, then Israel would start its attacks against Lebanon again. There has been a ceasefire in place between Israel and Lebanon, Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon since November 2024, but that certainly hasn't stopped Israel from launching dozens and dozens and dozens of attacks into Lebanese territory during that entire period, and there are many people who have been killed as a result of that. What we've seen in the last few days is an escalation of that, certainly a warning against Hezbollah trying to get involved. The Houthis in particular, I have seen some statements coming out from the Houthis saying that they are prepared to weigh in. To give you a bit of a sense of what the situation is on the ground here in Israel, this morning when the sirens started to go off because of the launch of these attacks, and it was a preemptive siren at about 8:15 this morning, the ABC team, we were all still in bed at the time when that happened, but this was something that we had not heard in Israel since October last year, when the Houthis stopped firing missiles at Israel in solidarity with Hamas and the Palestinian people in Gaza. They had been launching missiles every week or so in solidarity with them to attack Israel for its ongoing bombardment of Gaza, but that had not happened. The Houthis now potentially also weighing in on this, and that again shifts another economic issue into this equation as well, because of the impact that the Houthis have on shipping through the Red Sea leading up into the Suez Canal. They have really disrupted global supply chains quite a lot over the last couple of years, on and off, while they have been carrying out their operations there. And if that starts to happen again, that's another economic blow that will come from this conflict, and it'll be something that many people are watching incredibly closely to see how that plays out as well. Israel, for its part, says it is standing prepared to respond to any of those threats, and that it will deal with them with significant force there if those proxies of Iran are also brought into the fold.
Matt, you've been down to the air raid shelter once or twice over the last few hours. In a moment, John Lyons, our Americas editor, wants to ask you a few things about your perception of what is going on there. But what I'm really keen to know is, what's it like down there? What do you do? What's the atmosphere? I mean, tell me about it.
Look, I can't say that the atmosphere in the ABC shelter is that exciting, considering it doubles as the bureau laundry, so we'll paint that mental image there for you. But it is a very thick, reinforced room at the bottom of the bureau with large metal doors that as soon as those sirens start to ring out, we enter that shelter and wait for clearance from the Israeli authorities, delivered through phones, through these phone apps that send messages out to the public that there is the all clear. So we've been down there about 3 or 4 times today already as these warnings have come through. And it's worth pointing out that a lot of buildings in Israel, depending on their age, don't actually have shelters inside them. It's more of a phenomenon since the Gulf War in the early 90s that buildings after that started to have these shelters, or safe rooms as they're often called, mamads if we use the Hebrew language there, that they had them built in there, including in apartment buildings. For many people who live in older buildings, they are reliant on public shelters, so they have to leave their apartment blocks or their houses, go into the street down the road to where those public shelters are. And we had seen messages come through from a number of the municipalities, the local councils across Israel over the last couple of days, saying that they had prepared those shelters for the public. They'd started to reopen them because they're not necessarily always open all of the time. So that is happening across the country as something of a, for want of a better word, a novelty. If we think about a city like Haifa up in the north, Haifa is a port city. It is also built into the side of the Carmel mountain. One of the shelters there is actually the underground funicular rail system, so that opens up for people to go in there and seek shelter. And the same thing happens in places like Tel Aviv, where there are underground transport links there as well. They double as shelters. So that is something that a lot of Israelis are currently dealing with. Another issue that we need to point out, however, though, public shelters are very common in predominantly Israeli towns. They aren't as common in predominantly Arab or Palestinian towns. And if we cast our minds back to the Iran-Israel war last year, that 12-day conflict, there was one incident in a Palestinian town known as Tamra, where there was a direct hit on a building and it did kill a number of residents there. But it also highlighted that in Tamra there weren't public shelters in the same way that down the road in one of the predominantly Israeli cities there was. There is this disparity there in terms of the protections within Israeli territory. There is also a great disparity in the West Bank, for example, as well, where there are sirens that ring out if you are close enough to an illegal Israeli settlement, because that is that infrastructure is there. So that's how a lot of Palestinians find out that something is happening, but not necessarily if they are further away, and they don't always have those shelters there as well. So this is a situation which affects people across this part of the world in very, very different ways. And I think for the next couple of hours at least, there is going to be a lot of walking up and down of stairs for the bulk of the population as they go into those shelters and seek some safety.
Matthew, we know that in war, information, propaganda becomes very important. Perceptions about who's winning and who's losing. We know that in Iran it's very hard to get reliable information. The comment before by the Revolutionary Guard that we have hit every US and Israeli sort of facility and base in the region, we know that that can't be true and isn't true. But we've both operated in Israel. We know there's military censorship there. The Israelis don't hide that. Although we as journalists don't like censorship of any sort, the argument for censorship by the Israelis and others at war is that they do not want the Iranians seeing if they've hit this or that X, Y or Z, because it'll boost morale in Iran, or it will give the Iranians an idea of what they've hit and what they've missed. We're seeing a lot of pictures at the moment out of Tehran and Iran of sites that have been hit by missiles. My question to you is, knowing also that you are needing to operate under some sort of censorship in terms of what you can film and where you can go, firstly, are you being prevented from reporting anything because of that censorship? And is it possible that Israel is being hit harder by Iran than we realise because those pictures just aren't getting out?
Look, there is obviously the potential for that, John. You are right. These censorship rules do come into force the moment that a conflict like this begins. And let's start by explaining to our audience what those censorship rules are. Effectively, the media on the ground are barred from reporting on any direct hits, for example, on Israeli military facilities, be they facilities that are, everything from office blocks through to, advanced military bases, research institutes, anything like that. We are banned from being able to report on that here on the ground. But we do need to stress to our audience that if that information is getting out of the country and can be verified elsewhere, we and many other, if not all other news organisations around the world will be able to bring that news to you. It may just not be coming from my mouth here on the ground in Israel. So that information can still get out, and it did get out last time around during the 12-day war in the middle of last year. What is happening at the moment, I actually don't know the answer to that, John, as to what sort of assets or what sort of bases may have been hit, what has been hit. Certainly the official line, albeit coming from unnamed Israeli military officials, is that they don't believe at this stage that any missiles have hit anything of major significance. We aren't seeing reports coming through from paramedics across the country of too many injuries. There was one that I saw earlier of someone who has been hit with it looks like blast injuries or perhaps some shrapnel up in the north, but we aren't necessarily seeing a lot of that. Sometimes you do get into these odd situations where you can say that something has been hit, but you just can't say what it is that has been hit. A missile has hit in northern Tel Aviv, for example, but if that was a military base, then you wouldn't necessarily be able to provide that specific detail. So it does lead to an awkward situation here, particularly when journalists are trying to get that message out, and when you will hear from the Iranian government, but you also hear from the Israeli government that the missiles are being directed at, say, civilian sites. Well, yes, in some situations they may well be hitting civilian sites, and we've seen that before in Israel back last year, where there were blocks of flats in the centre of Tel Aviv, far away from any sort of military establishments that were being hit there. But at the same time, military bases were being hit as well. There is a narrative that governments are going to want to put out there about this being a war against the civilian population, which doesn't necessarily stand up when you start to take into account those military assets that have been hit. But it is very early days at this stage, and certainly the barrage of missiles that we have seen, while the Israeli military is saying it is in the dozens, it isn't quite as intense, certainly here in Israel, as it was last time around when Iran responded to those attacks. That was a response that took some 12 hours or so before it started to come through. This is wave after wave at the moment. It doesn't seem to be hitting with the same amount of intensity, but that may also be going to the fact that Iran is not just targeting Israel this time around, it is also targeting US bases across the Gulf region, and some of those direct hits have been reported in places like that, although that information is also still being firmed up.
Matthew Doran, live for us in Jerusalem. For the moment, Matt, thank you very much for that. We'll be back to you shortly. To reiterate what Matt was saying there, just hearing that Qatar has said that it has intercepted a third wave of attacks that targeted several areas in the country. So that's Qatar, and it would appear that Iran's foreign minister has given another interview in which he suggested that he has told his counterparts from Saudi, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait and Bahrain and Iraq that it will use all its defensive and military capabilities under legitimate right of self-defense. He has posted that, Iran's foreign minister, on Telegram. So that the latest from there. He's called on his regional counterparts to prevent the US and Israel from abusing their territory. That's the quote, abusing their territory to carry out aggressive operations against Iran. Those are the latest breaking news lines. One of the other big developing situations is what is happening in the airspace over the Middle East. There are flight delays and cancellations due to regional airspace closures. 4 Doha-bound Virgin Australia services that are operated by Qatar Airways are actually returning to Australia this evening. They cannot get in. Flights that have left Doha and are travelling to Australia are continuing as scheduled. There'll be many worried people waiting for people on aeroplanes in the air at the moment. Virgin Australia says the safety of our guests and crew is always a top priority. Guests booked to travel to Doha in the coming days should closely monitor their flight information and visit the Smart Traveller website for the latest travel advice. Qantas telling us that they are monitoring the situation. It has a number of flight path options used on flights to Europe. It says safety is its #1 priority, but no planes, as you can see, commercial planes anyway, are going over a vast swathe of the Middle East there. And just to remind you, the advice being given to Australians in Iran, the government has described the situation as extremely volatile and advised Australians against travelling to Iran. Smart Traveller, that's operated by DFAT, says there is a risk of reprisal attacks and further escalation in the region. DFAT saying Australians, including dual citizens, are at risk of being detained. For the Australians that are currently in Iran, the Travel Advice Service says to be prepared to shelter in place for an extended period. Make sure, they say, you have supplies of water, food and medication. So that's the advice from DFAT here in Australia. Let's bring in Roxanne Farmayan, who is a Middle East expert from the University of Cambridge. Thank you for your time this evening. At what danger are we at this point, do you think, of this being a wide Middle East conflict?
I think it's already becoming a wide Middle East conflict. I think it's affecting, as you were just saying, commercial flights across the Gulf. It's clear that the Houthis are already trying to close down or affect shipping in the Red Sea. And it's so far the Americans and the Israelis have hit over 9 cities in Iran, and its retaliation is extending to a number of the states, including Bahrain and Qatar in the Gulf. So I think we're seeing already the anticipation often spoken about in the lead up to this war, that it is immediately being regionalized. And of course, Iranian missiles are already attacking Israel as well.
As you heard me just say, Iran's foreign minister calling upon regional counterparts to prevent the US and Israel from abusing their territory. What is the proliferation of American bases in that region?
Well, they've got a lot of bases. They're heavily entrenched in the region. They've got bases in Kuwait and in Iraq. They've got, of course, serious naval buildup in the Mediterranean, as well as having a aircraft carrier off the coast of Iran down by the Gulf. And they've got bases in Al Udeid in Qatar. And so we see a great deal of established American military installations in that region. At the moment, we're also seeing both Chinese and Russian shipping, naval shipping that has intelligence capabilities and underwater tracking that are located inside and outside the Strait of Hormuz. So there's a great deal of combined installations that we're seeing there from different countries.
That's really interesting. Just another news line coming from Iran's army. In a statement, they said Iran's army has sent a wave of tens of drones launched towards Israel. We've been talking about drones because we hadn't seen them used as yet. If this is the case, we have to take everything with a bit of cynicism until we wait and get proper confirmation. But in terms of Iran's capabilities, drones might be their best when you've got the Iron Dome protecting Israel.
Well, and one of the things that Iran practices is swarming techniques. So it'll send many rather than just one or two. And so it depends on whether they're armed drones, whether they're surveillance drones. But it certainly is one of the weapons at Iran's disposal to hit both Israel and to hit other areas in the Gulf, particularly American and Israeli shipping. So we'll have to see whether that's one of the tools that they're bringing out right at the beginning.
Roxanne, how difficult is it to know with any certainty what Iran's capabilities, nuclear capabilities, currently are?
I think we're pretty clear, actually, that its nuclear capabilities are very constrained. It has said from the get-go that it is not interested in a weapon. I think the interesting thing here is that it's 2 nuclear weaponized states that are attacking Iran, and it has at different times, of course, been under UN inspections. And in fact, in June, during the June 12-day war, it was being inspected at that time. So I think that we can safely assume it will not be pulling out any nuclear weapons. What we don't know is if that is possibly on the agenda of the Israeli military eventually. But what we also do know is that the attacks so far are quite different than during the June war, in that they have not been against Iran's military installations so much as against its leadership installations, particularly the Justice Department, the Parliament, the different offices of governance that imply that there's an effort to be decapitating the government again.
And where would that leave Iran? I mean, if there is a decapitation, what happens?
Well, it's a very different situation than it occurred during Venezuela and the American program there, operation there. In Iran, it's a very diffuse system already after the 12-day war in June, we have been hearing about how Khamenei, the supreme leader, has already been diffusing his various arms of power to other people. I think there has been some news that the head of the judiciary has been killed in this first round of bombings in Tehran. But it sounds to me like there's a very good chance that the regime itself so far has the mechanism by which to remain in power. And so far, very interestingly, we have not seen any defections or any indication that the regime itself will crumble.
Yeah, interesting. We're not seeing... Yeah.
Sorry.
No. And given that, so I mean, we know during the uprising, a month or two ago, that was brutally suppressed by the Iranian regime, that internet access was cut, mobile access was cut. It has happened again, so getting information out is very difficult. And I guess, Roxanne, the most important point of that, it limits any internal resistance.
It does and it doesn't. I think that there is a loyalty, a patriotism about supporting Iran by Iranians, not necessarily the regime, but there is a rally around the flag effect, I think, that we need to expect to some degree. And I think that they're used to the blackouts, and still there's a great opportunity for people to communicate via family, by visitation, by getting onto the streets. We didn't find, even during the blackouts of the last round of protests in January and February, that people were not going into the streets because of the blackout. I think communication is not the first thing that we will be seeing affecting the response of the people.
Just finally, we were talking just on Friday about the diplomacy efforts between America and Iran.
Yes.
We were talking about the different things that were on the table and whether concessions would be made. Is that all completely ripped up now?
Well, according to the statement by the Foreign Minister Araghchi, it sounds very much as though that's on hold, just as it was at the time of the June 12th war, 12-day war. They had been in negotiations just like they were this time. And I think this has two implications. One, there is really waning hope on the part of the Iranians that the Americans are taking this seriously as an option, as diplomacy being a solution. And second of all, I think it certainly gives pause to other states as to the reliability of the U.S. when it says it's interested in a diplomatic solution to things, because clearly in both cases they have interrupted the negotiations in order to attack directly.
Roxanne Farman-Farmayan, thank you very much for joining us there from the University of Cambridge. Thank you. We were just showing you the latest pictures that are coming from the IDF.